The year was 1894 in the rugged, windswept town of Montella, Italy. A child was born, but there was no joy in the house of Cianciulli that day. Little Leonarda came into this world unwanted, a product of violence, her very existence a reminder of shame to her mother. And oh, how that mother hated her. Can you imagine it? To look into the eyes of the woman who gave you life and see nothing but cold, sharp loathing? It wasn't just neglect, my dears, it was a war. Her mother shunned her, cursed her breath, and wished her dead. Leonarda grew up drinking bitterness instead of milk, a lonely, fragile girl who tried, twice, to hang herself just to escape the icy glare of her own home. But death wasn't ready for her yet. The rope broke, the knot slipped. Fate had a much darker purpose in mind for this little girl. She grew up wild and desperate for affection, grasping at anything that felt like love. So, when she met a registry office clerk named Raphael Pansardi, she didn't just fall in love. She clung to him like a drowning woman to a raft. But her parents? They had other plans. They wanted to marry her off to a cousin, to keep the bloodlines close and the money closer. But Leonarda was stubborn. In 1917, she defied them all and married Raphael. And that, my friends, is when the true darkness began to seep into the cracks of her life. On her wedding day, amidst the celebration, her mother didn't offer a blessing. Instead, she stood tall, eyes burning with malice, and spat a curse upon the newlyweds. She damned their union, promising them a life of misery. Leonarda, superstitious and terrified, felt those words burrow into her soul like maggots. She believed them. She knew, deep in her frantic heart, that the curse was real. And indeed, the world seemed to turn against them. In 1930, their home in Potenza was torn apart by an earthquake, the very ground trying to swallow them whole. But the earth was kind compared to the stars. You see, Leonarda sought answers. In the shadows, she visited a traveling Romani fortune teller, a woman with eyes that had seen too much. Leonarda extended her hands, trembling, hoping for good news. The old woman looked at her palms, traced the lines of her fate, and recoiled. The prophecy she whispered was not of wealth or health. She said, "In your right hand, I see prison. In your left, a criminal asylum." A cold wind blew through Leonarda's spirit that day. But the curse of her mother and the prophecy of the gypsy were nothing compared to the tragedy of her womb. This is where the horror truly takes root. Leonarda Cianciulli became pregnant 17 times. 17. Just think of the toll that takes on a body, on a mind. But the curse was hungry. 3 of those pregnancies ended in the blood of miscarriages. 10 more ended with tiny coffins. 10 babies died in her arms, snatched away by illness, by weakness, by the cruel hand of fate. She watched them fade, one by one, helpless against the tide of death. She became a woman possessed by grief, half mad with the sound of phantom cries in the night. She started to see things, spirits, demons, shadows looming over the cradles of the few children who survived. She was convinced that death was a physical entity, stalking her house, waiting for a moment of weakness to steal her remaining treasures. Only 4 children survived the slaughter of her infancy, 4 out of 17, and the fierce, terrifying love she poured into them was heavier than iron. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a guardian at the gates of hell, ready to tear the throat out of anything that threatened her brood. Her favorite, the apple of her eye, was her eldest son, Giuseppe. He was her sun and her moon, the only light in her dark world. She doted on him with an intensity that made the neighbors whisper. She would die for him. More importantly, she would kill for him. But for now, they were just a struggling family, moving north to the quiet, sleepy town of Correggio, trying to outrun the ghosts of the past. Leonarda set up a little shop, presenting herself as a kind, eccentric woman. She sold soaps, she baked cakes, and she offered to read the palms of the local women, just as the gypsy had read hers. She was charming. She was helpful. She was the sweet little lady down the street. But inside, the gears of madness were turning, greased by the blood of her dead children and the fear of the prophecy. She was waiting, watching, terrified that the universe would come to collect her last remaining joy. And the universe, cruel as it is, was about to send a war that would threaten to take Giuseppe away. Correggio was a place where everybody knew everybody's business, or at least they thought they did. When Leonarda and her family arrived, they were just another face in the crowd, refugees from the south seeking a quiet life. But Leonarda? She was never made for the quiet. She was a woman of immense, vibrating energy, small and stout, but with eyes that seemed to drill right through your forehead. She set up shop in her new home, and very quickly the whispers began. She wasn't just a housewife. She was a woman of respect. In the hushed corners of the market, the women of Correggio called her a gifted one, a psychic, a witch. She leaned into it. Oh, how she loved the power it gave her. Her kitchen became a confessional for the lonely and the desperate. Women would come to her when the doctors failed, when the husbands strayed, when the money ran dry. Leonarda would sit them down at her wooden table, the air thick with the smell of drying herbs and simmering pots, and she would hold their hands. She told them what they wanted to hear. She read their cards, studied their palms, and sold them little charms and potions. She was the mother figure they craved, stern but listening, mysterious but capable. They trusted her with their deepest, darkest secrets. And that trust, my friends, was the knife she would eventually twist in their backs. But while she was playing the village mystic, the world outside was burning. It was 1939. The air in Italy was heavy with the rhetoric of Benito Mussolini. Fascism was marching through the streets, boots clacking on the cobblestones, drums beating a rhythm of war. And then the letter came. The piece of paper that stopped Leonarda's heart cold in her chest. Her beloved Giuseppe, her surviving jewel, the boy she had wrestled from the jaws of death time and time again. He was to be drafted into the Italian army. He was going to the front lines. Panic doesn't quite describe what happened to Leonarda. It was a descent, a total, catastrophic collapse of sanity. All the old ghosts returned in a rush, the dead babies, the little coffins, the gypsy's prophecy of doom. She saw bullets tearing through her son's flesh. She saw him bleeding out in some muddy trench, far away from her protection. She couldn't allow it. She wouldn't allow it. She spent nights awake, pacing the floorboards until they creaked like bones. She prayed, but not to the God you and I know. She prayed to the ancient, dark things she believed lived in the shadows. One night, in a fever dream of desperation, she claimed the Virgin Mary appeared to her. But this was not a gentle mother of peace. This was a demanding spirit. The message was clear, etched into Leonarda's fevered brain. Blood washes blood. To save a life must be given. A sacrifice was required. Not a goat, not a chicken. Those were for petty wishes. To save a son from the jaws of a world war, the offering had to be equal in value. It had to be a human soul. The logic of the insane is terrifyingly simple. If she killed others, the universe would accept the trade and spare Giuseppe. It was a transaction, a barter with death. Leonarda wiped her tears, stood up, and looked at her kitchen with new eyes. It wasn't just a place to cook anymore. It was an altar. She needed victims. But not just anyone. She couldn't grab a man off the street. That would bring the police. She needed people who were already looking to leave. People who were lonely, unconnected, and desperate for a change. People who, if they vanished, everyone would just assume they had moved on to a better life. She smiled then, a cold, calculated stretching of lips. She knew exactly where to find them. They were already sitting in her kitchen, drinking her coffee, pouring out their hearts, begging her for a miracle. She looked at her client list, her eyes scanning the names of the spinsters and the widows who hung on her every word. She wasn't just their fortune teller anymore. She was their predator. And the first lamb was already walking towards the slaughterhouse, completely unaware that the kindly soap maker of Correggio was sharpening her axe. Faustina Setti was a woman whom life had simply stepped over. She was 70 years old, though in her heart she carried the naive, fluttering hope of a schoolgirl. She was a spinster, a word that carried a heavy, gray weight in the Italy of 1939. To be unmarried was to be invisible, a piece of furniture in the corner of society, useful perhaps, but unloved. She lived a quiet, dusty life, her days filled with small chores and large silences. But Faustina had a secret weakness, a crack in her armor that Leonarda Cianciulli found immediately. She was desperately, achingly lonely. She wanted a husband. She wanted to be a wife, to have a home that wasn't just a waiting room for death. She wanted to be seen. Leonarda played her like a cheap violin. The soap maker sat across from Faustina in that dim, herb-scented kitchen, holding the older woman's calloused hands, and smiled the smile of a conspirator. "Faustina," she whispered, her voice low and thrilling, "the cards have turned. The stars have finally aligned for you." Leonarda spun a tale so sweet it would rot your teeth. She told Faustina that she had found a suitor. Not just any man, but a wealthy, distinguished gentleman living in Pola. He was looking for a wife exactly like Faustina, mature, sensible, and ready for a new life. Faustina's eyes lit up. It was a miracle. It was the answer to every prayer she had whispered into her pillow for 50 years. But there was a catch. There is always a catch with the devil. "You must tell no one," Leonarda commanded, her face hardening into seriousness. "Envy is a curse, Faustina. If the other women in the village find out, their jealousy will poison this match before it even begins. You know how they talk. You know how they hate to see others happy." Faustina nodded vigorously. She knew. She understood. Silence was the price of happiness. And so, the trap was set. Leonarda instructed her to sell everything. Her small patch of land, her furniture, her few trinkets of value. Faustina did as she was told, liquidating her entire existence into a stack of banknotes. 30,000 lire. It was her life savings, her dowry for a future that didn't exist. She brought the money to Leonarda, who pocketed it with the casual grace of a banker, calling it a fee for arranging the match and setting up the new household in Pola. But Leonarda's brilliance lay in the details. She knew that once Faustina vanished, people would ask questions. Relatives would write. Friends would wonder. So, she sat Faustina down at the kitchen table with pen and paper. "You will be too busy with your new husband to write immediately," Leonarda said soothingly. Write the letters now. Tell your cousins and your friends that you are well, that the journey was fine. That Pola is beautiful. I will mail them for you once you are settled, so they don't worry." It was a masterstroke of cruelty. Faustina sat there, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in concentration, writing postcards from a place she would never see, describing a happiness she would never feel. "I am safe," she wrote. "I am happy." She signed her name, sealing her own fate with ink. She was crafting the very alibi that would let her murderer sleep soundly at night. The date was set. It was the morning of her departure. Faustina arrived at Leonarda's house dressed in her finest clothes, a little suitcase in her hand, her face flushed with the excitement of a bride. She looked ridiculous and heartbreaking all at once, a woman running toward a mirage. Leonarda welcomed her in, locking the heavy wooden door behind her. "The train leaves soon," Leonarda said, her voice steady, devoid of any tremor. "But first, we must toast to your new life. A glass of wine, Faustina, to settle the nerves?" Faustina sat down. She looked around the kitchen, the copper pots gleaming on the wall, the heavy iron stove, the dark corners where the shadows seemed to pool. She accepted the glass. She raised it to her lips, her hand trembling slightly with joy. She looked at Leonarda, her friend, her savior, and smiled. She had no idea that she wasn't a guest in that house. She was livestock, and the butcher was just waiting for her to take that last, sweet sip. The glass was barely empty when the world ended for Faustina Setti. She didn't see the shadow move behind her. She didn't see the glint of the axe rising in the dim kitchen light. There was no scream, no struggle, no dramatic final realization of betrayal. Just a sickening thud, a wet crack of bone, and then silence. The dreams of Pola, the wealthy husband, the new life, all of it spilled out onto the stone floor in a spreading pool of crimson. Leonarda didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She stood over the body of the woman she had just called a friend, chest heaving slightly from the exertion, and felt nothing. No guilt, no horror, only a grim sense of duty. The sacrifice had been made. The debt to the dark spirits was paid. Now, there was only work to be done. And oh, what terrible work it was. This is where the story leaves the realm of murder and enters the domain of nightmares. Leonarda didn't just hide the body, she unmade it. She dragged the lifeless form of Faustina to the center of the room. She rolled up her sleeves, her face set in a mask of intense concentration, like a sculptor preparing a block of marble. She wasn't a killer in that moment. She was a butcher, a chemist, an alchemist of flesh. She picked up a knife and an axe, and she began to disassemble Faustina Setti. I will spare you the sound of the steel hitting the joints, the tearing of the sinew. But know this, it takes strength to quarter a human body. It takes time. Leonarda worked with a terrifying efficiency. She cut the body into 9 pieces, 9 chunks of meat that used to be a person. She gathered them up, her hands slick and red, and threw them into her largest copper pot. The same pot she used to boil laundry. The same pot she used to make soap. She added 7 kilograms of caustic soda, sodium hydroxide, a chemical so corrosive it can dissolve skin on contact. She poured bucket after bucket of water into the pot until the meat was submerged. Then she lit the fire. She stirred. Round and round went the ladle, mixing the chemical slurry. The kitchen began to fill with a smell that wasn't quite death, but something sharper, chemical and acrid. To cover it, she didn't open a window. She poured in bottles of cologne. cheap perfume to mask the scent of boiling humanity. She watched the pot boil. She watched the pieces of Faustina soften, separate from the bone, and dissolve. In her own words, later confessed to the police with chilling pride. I stirred the whole mixture until the pieces dissolved in a thick, dark mush that I poured into several buckets. She poured the sludge into a nearby septic tank, washing away the last physical evidence of the woman's form. The bones? She didn't throw them away. She let them dry. She crushed them. She waited. But the blood was precious. Before the axe had fallen, or perhaps immediately after, she had caught the blood in a basin. She didn't let a drop go to waste. She placed the basin in her oven, waiting for the blood to coagulate, to thicken into a dark, gelatinous paste. She took this paste, dried it until it was brittle, and then ground it in a coffee mill. Grind. Grind. The sound of the grinder mixed with the bubbling of the pot. She mixed the red powder with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, and eggs, along with a bit of margarine. She kneaded the dough. She made tea cakes. Crunchy, sweet, chocolate tea cakes. She didn't eat them all herself. Oh no, that would be wasteful. She fed them to Giuseppe. She fed them to the neighbors who came to visit. Eat, she would say, smiling that warm, grandmotherly smile. They are fresh from the oven. And they ate. They complimented her baking. They wiped the crumbs from their lips, never knowing that they were consuming the soul of Faustina Cetti. The first lamb had been completely erased. She was soap. She was sewage. She was dessert. And Leonarda Cianciulli washed her hands, looked at her son, and felt safe. For a little while, for a few months, the house in Correggio was quiet. The soap made from Faustina Cetti lathered rich and creamy, washing the shirts of Leonarda's son, cleansing the floors, scrubbing the very scent of guilt from the air. The tea cakes were long gone, digested by the unsuspecting bellies of the neighborhood. For a while, Leonarda felt a strange, cold peace. She looked at Giuseppe and saw him safe, wrapped in the invisible cloak of the sacrifice she had made. The bargains seemed to be holding. The spirits were satiated. The blood had bought them time. But magic, dark magic especially, is a leaky vessel. It doesn't hold water forever. As the year 1940 dragged on, the war in Europe grew louder, hungrier. The news from the front lines was terrifying. The piece that Leonarda had purchased with an axe began to fray at the edges. The shadows in the corners of her bedroom grew longer again. The phantom cries of her dead children returned, whispering that one life was not enough. One old spinster was a paltry price for the life of a young, healthy man like Giuseppe. The protection was fading. The barrier was thinning. She could feel the icy breath of death on her neck once more. She needed to renew the contract. The hunger returned, not for food, but for security. She needed another lamb. And just like before, the victim was already sitting in her kitchen, sipping coffee, unaware that she was being measured for a coffin. Her name was Francesca Soavi. She was different from Faustina. She wasn't looking for love. She was looking for a purpose. Francesca was a teacher, a woman of some education, but she was tired. She was tired of the small-town gossip, tired of the limited horizons of Correggio, tired of scraping by. She wanted a career. She wanted respect. She was ambitious, and ambition, my dears, is a hook that is very easy to bait if you know what you are doing. Leonarda, with her spider-like patience, listened to Francesca's complaints. She nodded sympathetically, pouring more wine, offering more comfort. And then she struck. "Francesca," she said, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper that sounded like salvation. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. But I have friends. Powerful friends. Leonarda spun a new web, intricate and dazzling. She told Francesca that she had secured her a position, a prestigious job at the girls' commercial school in Piacenza. It was perfect. It was everything Francesca had ever wanted. A fresh start, a good salary, a life of dignity. Francesca was ecstatic. She could see the classrooms, the students, the new apartment in a new city. She was ready to pack her bags that very instant. But Leonarda raised a hand. Patience, my dear. There is a condition. Of course there was. You must tell no one. Not a soul. If the others find out, if the other teachers hear of how you got this job, they will be jealous. They will stir up trouble. You must leave in secret. Only once you are settled in Piacenza can you write to them. It was the same script, the same deadly play. But Francesca, blinded by the promise of a future, didn't see the trap. She agreed. She was so eager to please her benefactor that she did exactly what she was told. On a quiet afternoon, she sat at Leonarda's table, pen in hand, and wrote the letters that would become her own obituary. She wrote to her family, to her friends, telling them she was moving to Piacenza for a wonderful opportunity. She dated them for the future. She wrote about how lovely the school was, how kind the people were. She was ghostwriting her own life, creating a paper trail for a woman who would cease to exist before the ink was even dry. September 5th, 1940. That was the day. The heat of the summer was fading, the leaves were beginning to turn, and Francesca Soavi arrived at Leonarda's door for the last time. She brought her savings, 3,000 lire, just as she was told. It wasn't as much as SETI, but it was enough. She walked into the house with a smile, her heart pounding with the thrill of the journey ahead. She saw the suitcases by the door. She saw the kindly face of the soap maker. She didn't see the axe hidden behind the stove. She didn't see the copper pot, scrubbed clean and waiting for a new stew. She took a seat, accepted a glass of wine to toast the journey, and drank deep. She trusted Leonarda completely, and that trust was the last thing she ever felt. Francesca Soavi never made it to Piacenza. She never stood in front of a classroom of girls. She never started her new life. The moment the wine hit her stomach, the axe was already in motion. It was a single, brutal arc of violence. Leonarda didn't hesitate. She didn't tremble. By the time Francesca hit the floor, she was already gone. The second lamb had been sacrificed. Leonarda stood over the body, and this time, there wasn't even the breathless exertion of the first kill. She was stronger now. She was practiced. She looked at the mess on her floor not with horror, but with the critical eye of a butcher inspecting a side of beef. There was no time for sentimentality. Giuseppe's safety was paramount, and the ritual had to be completed before the sun went down. She dragged Francesca's body to the center of the kitchen, the stone flags slick with fresh crimson. The process was faster this time. Leonarda moved with a terrifying rhythm. Chop, break, cut. The knife work was precise. She knew exactly where the joints connected, where the resistance would be. She dismantled Francesca Soavi piece by piece, reducing a human being, a teacher, a dreamer, into raw materials. The copper ladle clanged against the side of the pot as she stirred the caustic soda. The bubbles rose, popping with a hiss, releasing that chemical stench that she masked with the heavy, floral scent of cheap cologne. She watched the flesh turn gray, then dark, then dissolve into a thick, bubbling sludge. She poured the essence of Francesca into buckets, and walked them out to the septic tank, dumping the slurry into the dark earth. The bones were dried in the oven, brittle and white, then crushed under a heavy rolling pin until they were nothing but dust scattered into the wind. But the most macabre part of the ritual remained. The blood. She had caught it in the basin again, warm and iron-rich. She placed it in the oven, watching it coagulate, dehydrating it until it was a dark, flaky crust. She ground it down in the coffee mill, that terrible, grinding sound echoing in the quiet house. She mixed the red dust with flour, sugar, chocolate, and eggs. She added margarine and milk. She kneaded the dough until it was smooth and dark. She baked tea cakes, dozens of them. And here is where the darkness truly swallows you whole. Leonarda didn't just hide her crime. She shared it. When the cakes were cool, she put them on a nice plate. She served them to the ladies who came to visit, the ones who sat in the very chair where Francesca had died, gossiping about the war and the weather. They ate the cakes. They licked the chocolate from their fingers. They said, "Oh, Leonarda, you have such a touch with pastry." But the true horror? She fed them to Giuseppe, her son, the boy she was trying to save. She watched him eat the blood of the woman she had murdered for him. She believed that by consuming the sacrifice, the protection would be stronger. It was a communion of the damned. Giuseppe ate, unaware that he was becoming a graveyard. He was eating the dead to stay alive. Leonarda watched him, her eyes shining with a fanatical love, convinced that she was the best mother in the world. She had turned Francesca Soavi into a shield, and she had fed that shield to her son, bite by sweet, chocolatey bite. 2 sacrifices had been made. 2 women had been wiped from the face of the earth, their bodies turned to sludge, their blood turned to sugar. And for a time, the universe seemed satisfied. Giuseppe remained safe. The war raged on, but the bullets missed him. Leonarda walked through the streets of Correggio with her head held high, the master of her own fate, a woman who had wrestled with death and won. But the beast that lived inside her, it was never truly full. It was just sleeping. And when it woke up, it wanted something richer. The first 2 victims had been simple women. Quiet, desperate, easily led. But the third? The third was a prize. Her name was Virginia Cassioppo. And unlike the others, Virginia had known glory. She was a former opera singer, a soprano who had once graced the stages of grand theaters. She had sung in La Traviata, her voice soaring over orchestras, bathing in applause. But time is cruel to sopranos. Virginia was now 53, her glory days fading into memory, her life in Correggio a pale shadow of what it had been. She was refined, yes, perhaps a little vain, clinging to the remnants of her past like a faded velvet cloak. Leonarda looked at Virginia and didn't just see a victim. She saw a masterpiece, a sacrifice of high value. If the blood of a spinster could buy protection, imagine what the blood of a diva could buy. Leonarda began her work. She didn't offer Virginia a husband or a teaching job. She offered her the one thing Virginia couldn't resist, an audience. "Virginia," Leonarda whispered, leaning across the table, her eyes shining with false admiration. "You are wasting away here. Your voice, it is still magnificent." She spun a tale of a mysterious impresario, a powerful theater manager in Florence. He was looking for a mature singer, a woman with experience and class, for a grand production. He didn't want a young, inexperienced girl. He wanted her. Virginia was intoxicated. Florence, the city of art, a return to the stage. It was the answer to the silence that had filled her life for so long. She preened. She smiled. She fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Leonardo applied the usual pressure. But you must be discreet, my dear. If the others find out, if they know you are returning to the stage, they will be green with envy. They will try to sabotage you. You must leave quietly. Tell no one. Virginia agreed. She began the ritual of self-erasure. She sold her belongings. She packed her trunks. She prepared her life savings. 50,000 lire and a staggering amount of jewelry, diamonds and gold that glittered like her past success. But Virginia was not as isolated as the others. She had friends. She had a sister-in-law who watched her closely. And in the days leading up to her departure, the secret almost spilled. Virginia hinted to a friend, Albertina Fanti, that something big was happening. She smiled cryptically. She almost broke the silence. But Leonarda's grip was too tight. Virginia swallowed her excitement and kept her mouth shut. The date was set for September 30th, 1940. It was a crisp, clear day. Virginia Cassiopo dressed like the star she believed she still was. She wore her best dress. She carried her jewels close to her chest. She walked to Leonarda's house not as a lamb to the slaughter, but as a queen returning to her throne. She stepped across the threshold, the scent of soap and herbs greeting her. She saw Leonarda, her friend, her manager, the woman who had given her back her dreams. The train for Florence leaves in an hour, Leonarda said, her hands resting calmly on the back of a chair. But first, a toast. To the opera. To the applause. Virginia sat down. She took the glass. She closed her eyes, imagining the velvet curtains rising, the lights dimming, the hush of the crowd. She didn't see Leonarda move. She didn't see the shadow detach itself from the wall. She was lost in a daydream of Florence, a dream that would be the last thing she ever saw. The soprano was about to sing her final note, and the soapmaker was ready to turn her into her greatest creation yet. The applause never came. The curtain never rose. As Virginia Cassiopo tipped the glass of wine to her painted lips, the axe came down with the finality of a gavel sentencing her to oblivion. She slumped forward, the dreams of Florence spilling out onto the cold stone floor alongside her lifeblood. The soprano was silenced. But for Leonarda, the performance was just beginning. This was her magnum opus. The previous victims had been practice. Virginia was the main event. Leonarda looked at the body of the once great singer and saw only potential. She dragged Virginia to the center of the room, and as she began the now familiar grisly work of dismemberment, she noticed something different. Later, she would recount this with a sickening, culinary pride that chills the blood. She described Virginia's flesh not as human remains, but as ingredients. She was fat and white, Leonarda would say, her eyes gleaming with the memory. When I melted her, the flesh was creamy. It was rich. She chopped the body into the 9 standard pieces, but this time, the alchemy was perfect. She threw the chunks of the soprano into the copper pot, added the caustic soda, and watched the magic happen. The mixture bubbled and hissed. But it didn't turn into the dark, chemical sludge of the others. It turned into a thick, milky white emulsion. It was smooth. It was luxurious. Leonarda poured it into buckets, but she didn't dump it all into the septic tank. Oh no, she let it cool. She poured it into molds. She added essential oils, almond, rose, lavender, to mask the smell of the grave. The result was soap. Bars of creamy, high-quality soap. It was better than anything she had made before. It lathered beautifully. It smelled divine. And what did she do with it? She gave it away. She gifted bars of Virginia, to the neighbors and friends who came to call. They washed their hands with the rendered fat of the missing opera singer. They bathed their children with it. They complimented Leonarda on her skill, scrubbing their skin with the dead woman, washing away the dirt of the day with the essence of a murder victim. But the horror didn't end at the wash basin. The blood of the soprano was special. Leonarda caught it in the basin, waiting for it to coagulate. She dried it in the oven, grinding it into a fine red dust. But this time, she didn't just make ordinary tea cakes. She went all out. She mixed the blood powder with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, and eggs, but she also added margarine and extra sugar. She wanted these cakes to be decadent. That woman was really sweet, Leonarda would later confess, a twisted double entendre that reveals the depths of her psychosis. She baked tray after tray of crunchy, chocolatey biscuits. And the neighbors came. They sat in the kitchen where Virginia had been butchered, the scent of baking masking the metallic tang of death. They drank coffee. They ate the cakes. They laughed and gossiped, unaware that they were participating in a cannibalistic communion. Leonarda watched them eat, her face a mask of grandmotherly kindness. She urged them to have another, and they did. They ate the soprano. But the most chilling image is that of Giuseppe, her beloved son, the reason for all this madness. He sat there, young and handsome, eating the sweet cakes made from the woman who had trusted his mother with her life. He was consuming the sacrifice. Leonarda watched him with a fierce, protective joy, believing that every bite he took strengthened the shield around him. She had turned a human being into soap to wash his clothes and cakes to fill his belly. She had literally fed the village to her son to keep him safe from the war. In her mind, she wasn't a monster. She was a mother. A mother who would do absolutely anything, burn, chop, boil, and bake, to keep her child alive. The perfect crime is a myth, a ghost story criminals tell themselves to sleep at night. There is always a loose thread. There is always a mistake. For Leonarda, that mistake was arrogance. She had become so confident in her role as the village witch, the kindly grandmother, that she forgot the most basic rule of predation: don't hunt the ones who will be missed. Virginia Cacioppo was not a lonely ghost like the others. She was a woman with family, with connections, and most importantly, with a very suspicious sister-in-law. Albertina Fanti did not believe the fairy tale of the sudden job in Florence. She knew Virginia. She knew Virginia wouldn't just vanish without a proper goodbye. But more importantly, Albertina had eyes. On that fateful September day, she had seen Virginia enter Leonarda's house. She had watched the door, and she had never seen Virginia come out. While Leonarda was busy boiling flesh and baking cakes, Albertina was busy asking questions. She went to the police. She spoke to the superintendent of Reggio Emilia, a man who had seen enough of the world to know that sweet old ladies are capable of terrible things. He listened. The story of the missing women, first Seti, then Soavi, now Cacioppo, started to form a pattern. A dark, jagged line that pointed straight to the door of the soap maker. The police arrived at Leonarda's house not with battering rams, but with questions. Leonarda met them with a smile. She was calm. She was the picture of innocence. Missing? Oh, my dears, they simply moved away. I helped them. Is it a crime to be helpful? She played the role of the misunderstood matriarch to perfection. She denied everything. She laughed at the accusations. Murder? In this kitchen? With these arthritic hands? It was absurd. But the police were thorough. They tore the house apart. And there, Hidden in the mundane clutter of a hoarder's life, they found the trophies. They found the jewelry of the missing women. They found the clothes of the opera singer, which Leonarda had been selling to a local merchant. They found the coins. The physical evidence was mounting, a mountain of guilt piling up in the corner of the room. Leonarda didn't break. She sneered at them. She claimed she was just selling the items for her friends who had moved away. She had an answer for everything. She was iron. She was stone. The police interrogated her for days, and she gave them nothing but riddles and scorn. She was protecting her secret, protecting her son, protecting the dark pact she had made with the universe. And then, the police played their final card. They looked at Leonarda, sitting there in her defiance, and they shrugged. "Fine," the superintendent said. "If you won't talk, maybe your son will. We found the jewelry in his possession, too. He must be the accomplice. Arrest Giuseppe Pansardi." The air left the room. The mask of the arrogant which shattered instantly. Leonarda's eyes went wide, the pupils trembling. Giuseppe? Her Giuseppe? The boy she had killed 3 women to save? The boy she had shielded from the war, from the curse, from death itself? If he went to prison, if he was punished for her sins, then everything, the blood, the soap, the cakes, the horror, it would all have been for nothing. The sacrifice would be rejected. The curse would win. A primal sound tore from her throat. It wasn't a word, it was a howl. "And oh," she screamed, leaping from her chair, her hands clawing at the air. "Not him. He knows nothing. He is innocent. I did it. I did it all." The floodgates opened. The silence of the tomb was broken. Leonarda began to speak, and the words tumbled out in a horrific, frantic torrent. She told them everything. She told them about the axe. She told them about the pot. She told them about the caustic soda, the boiling time, the way the flesh melted. She told them about the blood in the oven, the crunchy tea cakes, the soap she gave to the neighbors. She detailed every grisly second of the murders with a terrifying clarity, desperate to prove that she, and she alone, was the monster. She took every ounce of blame, every drop of blood, and painted herself in it to keep her son clean. The police listened, their pens scratching furiously, their faces paling as the true extent of the horror was revealed. The soapmaker of Correggio had finally unveiled her masterpiece. The trial of Leonarda Cianciulli began in 1946 in Reggio Emilia. It wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a carnival of horrors. The courtroom was packed. All of Italy wanted to see the monster of Correggio, the witch who had turned their neighbors into soap. They expected a raving lunatic, a woman foaming at the mouth, screaming obscenities. But what they got was far more terrifying. Leonarda sat in the dock, calm, composed, and utterly proud. She wore a dark dress, her hair pulled back, looking for all the world like a strict schoolmistress or a grieving widow. She didn't shy away from the details. In fact, she corrected them. When the prosecution faltered on a point of anatomy, or when a lawyer misunderstood the chemical process of saponification, Leonarda would interrupt. "No, no," she would say, her voice steady and authoritative. "You must mix the soda while the fat is hot, or it will curdle." She spoke of dismembering her friends with the same casual tone one might use to describe knitting. A sweater. She was a professional explaining her craft to amateurs. There was no remorse in her eyes, only a chilling annoyance that they didn't appreciate the skill involved. At one point, the skepticism in the room grew too loud. The lawyers, and even the judge, looked at this small, elderly woman and doubted. How could she, alone, chop up 3 bodies in such a short time? It seemed physically impossible. Leonarda, stung by the insult to her capability, stood up. Her eyes flashed with that old, dangerous fire. "Give me a body," she challenged the court. "Give me a corpse and a knife right here, and I will show you how it is done in 20 minutes. The courtroom fell into a stunned, terrified silence. No one took her up on the offer, but no one doubted her anymore. The verdict was inevitable, but the sentence was written in the stars long before the judge banged his gavel. Do you remember the prophecy? The one the Romani fortune teller whispered to a young, terrified Leonarda decades before? "In your right hand, I see prison. In your left, a criminal asylum." The judge read the sentence: 30 years in prison, 3 years in a criminal asylum. Leonarda didn't weep. She didn't collapse. She simply nodded. The prophecy was complete. The circle was closed. She had spent her entire life running from the curse, killing to escape it, bathing her hands in blood to wash away the fate that had been foretold. And in doing so, she had walked directly into its arms. She had fulfilled her own destiny with every swing of the axe. She was sent away, first to the gloomy walls of the prison, and later to the asylum in Pozzuoli. There, she didn't find redemption. She found a pen. She wrote her memoirs, a sprawling, dark confession titled An Embittered Soul's Confessions. In it, she didn't ask for forgiveness. She explained. She justified. She wrote about the deep, sacrificial love of a mother who would burn the world to save her child. She remained, until her dying breath, convinced that she had done what was necessary. On October 15, 1970, at the age of 76, Leonarda Cianciulli died in the asylum. The soapmaker was gone. The woman who had turned the kitchen into a slaughterhouse was finally at rest. But the horror didn't die with her. If you go to Rome today, you can visit the Criminological Museum. You can walk through the quiet halls, past the weapons of mobsters and the poisons of assassins. And there, in a glass case, you will see them. The axe, the dark, rusted blade that ended the lives of Faustina, Francesca, and Virginia. And next to it, the great copper pot, the very vessel where the women were boiled, where the flesh was melted, where the soap was born. It sits there, cold and empty, a silent witness to the madness of a mother's love. Some say that if you stand close enough to the glass, you can still smell the faint, cloying scent of cheap cologne and boiled fat. Others say you can hear the scraping of a ladle against copper. But that is just a story, isn't it? Just a dark tale to scare children. Or perhaps it is a reminder that the monsters are not under the bed. They are in the kitchen, baking cakes, smiling at you, waiting for you to take that first sweet bite.